Welcome back, my friend. Tonight we begin beneath a sky so ancient, it feels almost alive, stretching endlessly above you like a quiet ocean of stars. You lie still as if the earth itself is holding you in place, and for a moment it feels as though time has loosened its grip. The air is cool, carrying a faint scent of dust and distant stone, like the memory of a forgotten city buried beneath sand. Somewhere far away, a night wind moves softly, brushing across empty plains where the first stories of humanity once took shape. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, share your location and local time in the comments below. It is always fascinating to see where in the world these quiet moments connect us. Now dim the lights, your eyes adjust to the darkness, and slowly the stars sharpen into focus. Not just points of light, but something more deliberate, something watching perhaps, or at least that is how ancient minds once understood them. You begin to sense how the earliest people, standing exactly where you now imagine yourself, looked upward and felt a presence beyond explanation. In your ears, the faint whisper of night becomes something older, like the echo of voices carried across thousands of years. These were the first storytellers, long before ink met clay, before names were written down. They spoke of powerful beings who lived above beyond the sky, yet somehow deeply involved in the fragile beginnings of human life. Oddly enough, some of the earliest surviving myths from Mesopotamia describe a group of deities known as the Anunnaki, figures believed to govern both the heavens and the earth. These stories emerged from one of the first known civilizations, where writing itself was still a new and almost magical invention. Records confirm through research from institutions like Harvard University and the University of Chicago that the Sumerians developed one of the earliest writing systems around 5,000 years ago. Their clay tablets, preserved by time and accident, contain detailed accounts of God's creation and cosmic order. And within those tablets, the Anunnaki appear not as vague spirits, but as structured figures with roles, hierarchies, and intentions. You picture it now, a flat stretch of land between two great rivers, the soil rich, the air warm, and the sky vast beyond comprehension. Early cities rise slowly from mud and determination, their walls shaped by human hands that still tremble with uncertainty. Yet above them, always above them, is the sense of something greater. Your mind drifts to the idea that these people were not simply imagining. Or were they? Scholars still debate whether the Anunnaki were purely symbolic representations of natural forces or reflections of deeper psychological needs within early societies. Some researchers from Stanford University suggest these figures helped explain unpredictable events like floods, droughts, and the cycles of agriculture. Others argue that their consistent presence across texts hints at a more complex cultural memory, something layered and evolving. You feel the weight of that uncertainty. It lingers. The ground beneath your imagined feet feels warm, slightly uneven, packed with the labour of countless days. In the distance, a flicker of firelight marks a gathering place where stories are shared, passed from voice to voice, generation to generation. No books, no recordings, only memory and repetition. And yet those stories endured. One curious footnote emerges when you consider how detailed these early accounts were. The Anunnaki were not distant or silent. They were described as making decisions, holding authority, even disagreeing among themselves. This was not a simple myth of creation. It was a structured narrative of power. You begin to sense that these stories served more than one purpose. They explained the world, yes, but they also organized it. They gave meaning to hierarchy, to leadership, to the very idea that someone or something was in charge. The stars above seem closer now, almost pressing down. For a moment it feels as though you're standing at the edge of something vast, something that stretches far beyond a single civilization. Because while these stories began in Mesopotamia, their echoes would travel across time, influencing cultures you may not immediately connect. But here at the beginning, everything is still quiet, still forming. The wind shifts, slightly carrying with it a dry, earthy scent like sun-baked clay, cooling after a long day. You imagine the first markings pressed into soft tablets, each symbol carefully etched, not fully understood, yet deeply significant. These were not just records, they were attempts to capture something fleeting, something sacred. And you lying here beneath your imagined sky become part of that long chain of listeners. The same curiosity that stirred in those early minds now stirs in yours. Who were these beings? Why did they matter so deeply? And what does it mean that their stories survived when so much else did not? You feel your thoughts slow slightly, like water settling after a ripple. The questions remain, but they soften, becoming less urgent, more reflective. Because this journey is not about rushing to answers. It is about listening. The night deepens around you, and the stars continue their silent watch. Somewhere in that vast darkness, the idea of the Anunnaki begins to take shape, not as a fixed truth, but as a story layered with meaning, belief, and the quiet persistence of human wonder. And as you drift further into this ancient landscape, you begin to understand that this is only the beginning, the first whisper of a much longer tale, one that will carry you through cities, myths, and mysteries that still linger at the edge of understanding. The earth holds you steady, the sky watches above, and the story gently unfolds. The night air grows slightly cooler as your awareness settles deeper into that ancient landscape where the first cities begin to take clearer shape in your mind. The soft murmur of wind fades, replaced by a more deliberate sound, a faint scraping, steady and rhythmic, like something being carved with careful intention. You begin to notice hands at work, not hurried, not careless, but patient. Each movement presses meaning into clay line by line, symbol by symbol. The surface is smooth at first, then slowly filled with marks that seem abstract, yet carry immense weight. These are not drawings. They are words, or at least the earliest form of them. Your mind drifts closer, as if you are kneeling beside one of these ancient scribes. The scent of damp clay rises gently, mixed with the faint warmth of a nearby oil lamp. Its flame flickers, casting soft shadows that stretch and bend across the walls. You feel the stillness of concentration. Records confirm, according to research from the University of Oxford and Columbia University, that these clay tablets represent the earliest known writing system, often called cuneiform. Developed in ancient Sumer, this system allowed people to record not only trade and law, but also stories of God's origins and cosmic order. It was a turning point in human history, where memory no longer relied solely on spoken word. And within these tablets, carefully preserved through centuries of dust and ruin, the names of the Anunnaki begin to appear with increasing clarity. You trace the imagined symbols with your eyes, though you cannot read them. Still you sense their importance. These are not casual mentions. These are formal records embedded within hymns, rituals, and narratives that shaped entire societies. For a moment, it feels as though the past is speaking directly to you. A curious detail emerges when you consider how structured these writings were. The Anunnaki were not described randomly or inconsistently. They were organized into roles often associated with specific aspects of life, such as water, sky, fertility, and authority. Each name carried a function, almost like a position, within a vast and unseen system. You begin to understand that this was not simple storytelling, it was administration of the sacred. The soft crackle of the oil lamp continues steady and comforting. The scribe pauses briefly, adjusting their grip, then resumes carving with quiet determination. Each mark is deliberate, each line a commitment to preserving something that must not be forgotten. Scholars continue to debate whether these texts reflect literal belief in divine beings or serve as symbolic frameworks for organizing early human society. Some researchers from Yale University suggest that these structured pantheons help stabilize growing urban centers by reinforcing shared belief systems. Others, including voices from the University of Cambridge, propose that the consistency of these narratives hints at traditions passed down long before writing itself existed. You feel that tension between interpretation and mystery. It does not demand resolution, it simply exists like the space between stars. The clay tablet, once soft and impressionable, will soon harden. Time will seal it, preserving every mark. Thousands of years later, it will be unearthed, its surface still bearing the quiet imprint of a human hand that lived, worked, and believed. One scandalous aside, often overlooked, is how many of these tablets were discovered not in grand temples, but in ordinary places. Storage rooms, collapsed buildings, even refuse heaps. This suggests that the stories of the Anunnaki were not confined to elite priests or rulers alone. They were woven into everyday life. You imagine someone holding one of these tablets, perhaps reading it aloud in a dimly lit space, sharing its contents with others who listen closely just as you are now. The room would be quiet, the air thick with anticipation, every word carrying both meaning and mystery. Outside, the city breathes. Footsteps echo faintly against packed earth. A distant voice calls out, then fades. The world is alive, yet here in this small pool of light, everything feels focused and contained. A single story preserved with care. You begin to sense how powerful this moment truly is. The shift from spoken myth to written record changes everything. Stories that might have faded or transformed over generations now gain a kind of permanence. They become anchors, reference points, foundations for belief. And the Anunnaki, once fluid figures in oral tradition, now take on clearer forms. Names, roles, relationships. A divine structure begins to solidify. Your fingers resting lightly against your imagined surroundings. Feel the subtle texture of clay, slightly rough where it has begun to dry. It grounds you in this moment, reminding you that even the most distant myths are rooted in physical reality. The lamp flickers again, briefly dimming before returning to steady light. No agreement has been reached on whether the precision of these early writings indicates purely human invention or reflects something more complex in the transmission of knowledge. Some scholars from Princeton University suggest that the rapid development of writing systems points to an intense cultural need to preserve information. Others quietly wonder if there were influences we do not yet fully understand. You let that thought settle without resistance, because here in this quiet space between certainty and speculation, the story feels most alive. Not fixed, not rigid, but open, inviting reflection rather than demanding belief. The scribe finishes a final line, then gently sets the stylus aside. The tablet rests complete, for now its surface filled with meaning that will outlast its creator. You remain still observing. There is something deeply calming about this process. The slow, deliberate act of recording. The quiet confidence that what is written will endure. It contrasts with the fleeting nature of spoken words carried away by wind and time. And yet both forms matter, because before these tablets there were voices, before the marks there were memories, and before the names of the Anunnaki were pressed into clay, They lived in the imagination of those who looked up at the same sky you now picture above you. The connection feels subtle but real. The lamp burns lower, its light softening into a gentle glow. Shadows stretch longer, merging into the surrounding darkness. The scribe rises, leaving the tablet behind its surface, cooling as it prepares to harden. You stay a moment longer. The symbols no longer feel distant or abstract. They feel like echoes reaching across time, carrying fragments of a story that refuses to disappear. And as your thoughts continue to slow settling into the rhythm of this ancient world, you sense that each tablet, each carved line is another step deeper into a narrative far older than memory itself. The night remains quiet. The clay holds its secrets, and the names of the Anunnaki linger waiting to be understood. The quiet presence of those clay tablets lingers in your thoughts as the scene around you begins to shift, almost imperceptibly at first. The stillness gives way to movement. The faint hum of life returns, not distant now, but close, immediate, woven into the rhythm of a growing city. You feel it before you fully see it. The ground beneath your imagined feet is no longer empty or untouched. It is packed firm by countless footsteps, worn smooth by daily passage. A soft warmth rises from the earth, carrying with it the scent of sun-baked mud and freshly worked brick. Somewhere nearby, water flows slowly through a narrow channel, guided by careful hands and quiet planning. For a moment, it feels as though you are standing within one of the earliest cities ever built. Low structures stretch outward, in uneven rows, their walls formed from clay and straw shaped and reshaped over time. Smoke curls gently upward from cooking fires, blending with the fading light of evening. Voices overlap in a steady murmur, not chaotic but alive. You sense routine here, purpose, and a fragile but growing sense of order. Records confirm, based on studies from the University of Chicago and Stanford University, that cities like Uruk and emerged as some of the first true urban centers around 5,000 years ago. These were not simple villages. They were complex systems, with governance, trade, and social hierarchy already taking shape. And above all of this, always present yet unseen, was the influence attributed to the Anunnaki. You begin to notice how deeply this belief is woven into the structure of daily life. It is not confined to temples or rituals, it is everywhere. In the way people organize themselves, in the roles they assume, in the quiet acceptance that there is a higher order guiding it all. A curious footnote appears when you consider how early kings were described in these societies. They were not merely leaders chosen by the people. They were often presented as representatives or even direct descendants of divine beings. Their authority was not debated. It was accepted as part of a larger cosmic arrangement. You watch as a figure moves through the narrow street, their presence commanding attention without the need for words. Others step aside not out of fear, but out of recognition. This person carries something more than status. They carry meaning. The air shifts slightly cooler now as evening deepens. A distant bell echoes softly, marking the passage of time. It feels deliberate, almost ceremonial, as though each moment is being acknowledged by something greater than the people who live within it. Scholars continue to examine whether this connection between rulers and divine beings was a strategic development or a sincere belief held by early societies. Some researchers from Yale University suggest that linking kingship to the Anunnaki helped maintain stability in rapidly expanding populations. Others, including voices from the University of Cambridge, argue that these beliefs were not imposed but emerged naturally from a worldview that saw no clear separation between the human and the divine. You let that idea settle, because here in this city the boundary does feel thin. The sky above has darkened into a deep blue, scattered with early stars. They seem brighter now, more noticeable against the fading light. You recall the earlier sense of being watched, or perhaps simply observed. That feeling returns subtle but persistent. In your ears, the sounds of the city blend into a steady rhythm. Footsteps voices the soft creak of wooden doors, the distant movement of water. It is not loud, but it is constant, like a heartbeat that never fully stops. And within that rhythm, the presence of the Anunnaki is not dramatic or overwhelming. It is quiet, assumed, accepted. One scandalous aside emerges when you consider how much effort was devoted to maintaining this connection. Temples were not just places of worship, they were centers of administration, storage, and economic activity. Offerings were made regularly, not out of occasional devotion, but as part of an ongoing relationship between humans and the divine. You imagine the weight of that responsibility, to live in a world where every action, every decision, is seen as part of a larger system governed by unseen forces. It is both comforting and heavy. The scent of cooked grain drifts through the air, warm and grounding. It reminds you that life here is not only about belief, it is about survival, cooperation, and the slow building of something lasting. No agreement has been reached on whether the structure of these early cities was primarily influenced by practical necessity or shaped significantly by religious belief. Some scholars from Princeton University emphasize the role of environmental factors such as irrigation and resource management. Others suggest that the perceived will of the Anunnaki guided decisions about city layout, leadership and social organization. You feel that duality again, the practical and the spiritual existing side by side, not in conflict, but in quiet partnership. A breeze moves through the streets, carrying with it a faint trace of incense from a nearby temple. The scent is subtle, almost sweet, lingering, just long enough to be noticed before fading again. It adds another layer to the atmosphere, something intangible, yet deeply present. You turn your attention upward once more. The stars are clearer now, scattered across the sky, like fragments of a story too vast to fully grasp. Each one seems to hold a piece of meaning, a connection to the beliefs that shaped this world. For a moment it feels as though the city itself is aligned with the sky, as if the structures below mirror something above, an order that extends beyond what can be seen or touched. You remain still, taking it in. The warmth of the ground, the rhythm of life, the quiet acceptance of a higher presence. It all blends into a single cohesive experience, one that feels both distant and strangely familiar. Because even now, in your own time, the idea of looking upward for meaning has not entirely disappeared. The city continues its gentle motion around you, neither rushing nor pausing. It simply exists, sustained by the beliefs and actions of those who call it home. And as your thoughts continue to slow settling into the calm cadence of this ancient world, you begin to understand that the story of the Anunnaki is not just about distant beings or forgotten myths. It is about how people made sense of their place in the world, how they found order in uncertainty, and how they built entire civilizations under the quiet, watchful presence of something they believed to be greater than themselves. The night deepens, the city breathes softly, and the story carries you forward. The rhythm of the city softens as your awareness drifts beyond its walls into a quieter space where stories take on deeper meaning. The distant sounds of daily life fade, replaced by something slower, more deliberate. A voice, perhaps imagined, perhaps remembered, begins to shape the darkness around you. It feels ancient. You sense that this is where explanations begin, not in stone or structure, but in narrative, in the careful weaving of ideas that attempt to answer the most difficult question of all. How did you come to be here? The air carries a faint scent of ash and warm earth, like the remnants of a fire long burned but not forgotten. You sit or perhaps simply rest as the story unfolds around you, not told directly, but revealed in fragments that settle gently into place. Records confirm, based on research from institutions such as Harvard University and the University of California, that Mesopotamian creation myths were among the earliest attempts to explain human origin in written form. These accounts describe a world shaped by divine forces, where the Anunnaki play a central role in the formation of both the earth and humanity itself. You begin to picture it, a time before cities, before rivers were guided, before names were carved into clay. A time when existence itself was uncertain, undefined. The sky and the earth were not yet separate in the way you understand them now. Everything was fluid, shifting, waiting to be shaped. And within that vast uncertainty, the Anunnaki emerge as creators, not distant observers, but active participants in the formation of the world. They bring structure where there was none, order where there was only possibility. Their actions are not always gentle, but they are purposeful, driven by intentions that early humans sought to understand. A curious detail arises when you consider how humanity is described in these myths. Humans are not formed casually or accidentally. They are created with intent, often through a process that combines elements of the divine with the material world. Clay in particular appears again and again as the substance from which humans are shaped. You feel the texture of it in your mind. Cool, soft, impressionable. Something that can be molded, given form, brought to life through careful hands. It mirrors the very tablet you encountered earlier, as though creation itself follows the same principle as writing. To press meaning into matter, scholars continue to explore the significance of this imagery. Some researchers from Stanford University suggest that the use of clay reflects the environment of Mesopotamia, where mud was the most abundant and practical building material. Others propose that it carries symbolic weight, representing the connection between humanity and the earth, a reminder of both origin and limitation. You let that idea settle quietly, because there is something grounding in the thought that humans were shaped from the same material as their surroundings, not separate but deeply connected. But the story deepens. In some versions of these myths, the creation of humanity is not purely an act of generosity, it is a response to a need. The Anunnaki, powerful though they are, face challenges of their own. Labour burden responsibility, and so humans are created to share that weight, to serve. The word lingers in your thoughts not harshly, but with a quiet gravity. It suggests purpose, but also limitation. A role defined from the beginning, shaped by forces beyond human control. One scandalous aside appears when you consider how this idea might have influenced early societies. If humans were created to serve the gods, then serving authority within society could be seen as a natural extension of that purpose. It is a subtle but powerful connection, one that reinforces hierarchy and obedience. The fire you imagined earlier seems to glow slightly brighter now, its warmth steady and calm. It does not demand attention, but it anchors the scene, providing a sense of continuity as the story unfolds. Scholars remain divided on how literally these creation accounts were understood by ancient people. Some voices from Yale University suggest that these myths were deeply symbolic, offering moral and philosophical insights rather than factual explanations. Others, including perspectives from the University of Oxford, argue that for many early believers, these stories were not metaphorical. They were reality. You feel that tension again, the space between belief and interpretation, where certainty becomes less important than meaning. Your breathing slows slightly, matching the gentle rhythm of the narrative. It raises questions, but not in a way that disturbs. Instead, it invites reflection. What does it mean to be created? What does it mean to belong? The fire crackles softly, a quiet reminder of presence of continuity. The scent of ash and earth blends into something almost comforting, like a memory you cannot quite place but recognize nonetheless. No agreement has been reached on whether these creation myths developed independently within Mesopotamia or were influenced by earlier, now lost traditions. Some scholars from Princeton University suggest that elements of these stories may have roots in even older oral narratives. Others believe they represent a unique cultural development shaped by the specific environments and experiences of the Sumerian people. You allow that uncertainty to remain, because the story does not need to be fixed to be meaningful. The darkness around you feels softer now, less like an absence, and more like a space filled with quiet possibility. The stars, though not directly visible in this moment, seem to linger just beyond perception, as though watching the unfolding of these ideas. You sense that this is only one version of the story, that there are others, variations, interpretations, each adding another layer to the understanding of human origin. But for now, this version settles gently into place, offering a perspective that is both ancient and enduring. The fire begins to dim slightly, its glow softening into embers. The warmth remains steady and reassuring. You remain still, allowing the final pieces of the story to settle. Humanity shaped from clay, given purpose, placed within a world governed by the Anunnaki. It is a narrative that explains not only existence but responsibility, not only origin but role. And as your thoughts continue to slow, drifting deeper into this calm and reflective state, you begin to sense how these early creation myths laid the foundation for everything that followed. Belief, structure, meaning. The embers fade gently. The night holds you quietly, and the story moves forward, carrying you into the next layer of understanding. The warmth of those fading embers lingers gently as your awareness shifts once more, carrying you deeper into the meaning behind those early stories. The quiet sense of creation begins to settle into something more grounded, more practical, as though the purpose of humanity is now being tested within the rhythm of daily life. You sense movement again, not the steady hum of the city you passed through before, but something slower, heavier. The sound of effort, of work that repeats day after day, shaping both the land and the people who tend it. The earth beneath your feet feels firm, slightly uneven, marked by tools and footsteps that have worn paths into its surface. A faint scent of damp soil rises mixed with the sharp edge of cut reeds and distant water. It is a landscape shaped by labour. For a moment it feels as though you're standing at the edge of a field, watching figures move steadily under the open sky. Their motions are deliberate, almost rhythmic, digging, lifting, carrying. There is no urgency, yet no pause. The work continues, guided by necessity and expectation. Records confirm, based on research from the University of California and Columbia University, that early Mesopotamian societies relied heavily on organized labor to sustain agriculture and maintain irrigation systems. These systems were essential for survival in a region where water needed to be carefully managed and directed. And within the framework of belief shaped by the Anunnaki, this labor was not merely practical, it was meaningful. You begin to understand how the idea of human purpose introduced in those creation myths becomes visible here. If humans were created to serve, then this work is not just survival, it is fulfillment of that role. The thought does not feel oppressive, it feels accepted. A curious detail emerges when you consider how these beliefs may have shaped the mindset of early communities. Work was not separate from spirituality, it was part of it. Every task, no matter how simple, could be seen as contributing to a larger order established by divine forces. You watch as one figure pauses briefly, wiping their hands against their clothing, then returning to their task without hesitation. There is a quiet resilience in that motion, a sense of continuity that does not rely on explanation. The sky above remains wide and open, its colour shifting slowly as the day moves forward. Light filters down, softly illuminating the field in a gentle glow that feels both present and timeless. Scholars continue to examine whether the concept of humans serving the gods was primarily a theological belief or a reflection of social structure. Some researchers from Yale University suggest that these ideas reinforced cooperation and collective responsibility, essential for maintaining complex irrigation systems. Others, including perspectives from Stanford University, argue that such narratives may have also justified hierarchical systems where labour and authority were clearly defined. You feel that balance again, the interplay between belief and necessity, where one supports the other without clear separation. The sound of water becomes more noticeable, now flowing steadily through narrow channels carved into the earth. It is not loud, but it is constant, a reminder of how much depends on its careful management. Without it, nothing here would survive. One scandalous aside appears when you consider how much effort was required to maintain these systems. The work was relentless, often demanding coordination among large groups of people. Yet within the framework of belief, this effort could be seen as part of a divine plan rather than a burden imposed by circumstance. You imagine how that perspective might ease the weight of such labour. To believe that your actions serve not only your community, but also a higher order, it transforms effort into purpose, repetition into meaning. The air carries a faint trace of vegetation, green and slightly bitter, blending with the earthy scent of the soil. It grounds you in this moment, reminding you that this is a world built on both belief and physical reality. No agreement has been reached on whether the idea of humans as servants of the gods originated purely from mythological tradition or developed alongside the practical demands of early civilization. Some scholars from Princeton University suggest that the increasing complexity of society required narratives that encouraged cooperation and obedience. Others believe that these ideas were deeply rooted in spiritual understanding, emerging naturally from the worldview of the time. You allow that uncertainty to remain, because here in this quiet field, the distinction feels less important than the experience itself. The figures continues their work steady and unbroken. There is no dramatic moment, no sudden change, just the ongoing rhythm of effort sustained by both necessity and belief. Your mind drifts to the connection between creation and purpose. To be formed from clay, as described in the myths, is one thing, but to live out that purpose day after day is something else entirely. It is where story meets reality, where belief becomes action. You feel a subtle calm in that realization. The idea that purpose does not always arrive in grand moments, but often reveals itself in the quiet repetition of daily life. The light begins to soften as time passes, the sky shifting toward a warmer tone. Shadows grow slightly longer, stretching across the field in gentle patterns that move with the changing sun. The work does not stop. It continues steady and consistent as it has for countless days before and will for countless days after. There is a quiet dignity in that continuity, a sense that something important is being sustained, even if it is not fully understood. You remain still observing. The connection between humanity and the Anunnaki feels less distant now. It is not only found in myths or tablets, but in the lived experience of those who believe themselves part of a larger design. The water flows, the earth yields, and the people continue their work guided by a purpose that feels both imposed and embraced. As your thoughts settle further into this calm, steady rhythm, you begin to sense how deeply These early ideas shaped not only individual lives, but entire civilizations. The belief that existence itself carries purpose, the acceptance of roles within a greater system, and the quiet understanding that even the simplest actions can hold meaning when viewed through the lens of something larger. The field grows dimmer as evening approaches, the sounds soften, and the story, steady as the work it describes, carries you onward. The fading light settles gently over the land, and the steady rhythm of labour dissolves into something quieter, more reflective. The field empties slowly, footsteps retreating toward the distant shapes of homes and walls. A hush begins to spread, soft and gradual, as though the world itself is exhaling after a long day. You remain still held within that quiet. The scent of damp soil lingers now, touched by the coolness of evening air. Somewhere far off, a low rumble rolls across the horizon, too distant to disturb, yet impossible to ignore. It feels like a memory rather than a sound. For a moment, it feels as though the land itself is remembering something vast. Your mind drifts, carried by that distant echo, until the calm surface of this world begins to shift. The steady order you have come to understand loosens slightly, replaced by a sense of tension. Subtle at first, but growing. The sky darkens not with night alone, but with gathering weight. In your ears, the quiet hum of the evening changes. The soft sounds of life fade, replaced by the restless movement of wind that carries a sharper edge. The air feels heavier, charged with something approaching. You begin to sense the story turning. Records confirm, based on research from institutions such as the University of Cambridge and Harvard University, that flood narratives appear across multiple ancient Mesopotamian texts, including some of the earliest known written literature. These accounts describe a great deluge sent by divine forces, reshaping the world and testing the survival of humanity. And within these stories, the Anunnaki stand not only as creators, but as decision makers in moments of profound consequence. You picture the sky now, thick with clouds that gather faster than expected, dimming the light until the land below is cast in a muted grey. The wind rises, moving across the surface of the water, bending reeds and stirring the earth. A curious detail emerges when you consider how these flood stories are structured. They are not random disasters. They are deliberate acts often tied to the behaviour of humanity or the will of the divine. There is intention behind the chaos. You feel that shift, the sense that the world, once stable and ordered, can be altered by forces beyond human control. The first drops of rain fall softly, almost gently tapping against the ground with a quiet rhythm. It does not seem threatening at first, it feels ordinary, even calming, but it does not stop. The rain grows heavier, faster, filling the air with a steady, unbroken sound. The ground begins to darken as water seeps into the soil, then pools, then spreads. The channels that once guided water now struggle to contain it. You watch as the familiar landscape begins to change. Water rises slowly at first, then with increasing urgency, covering paths, swallowing edges, reshaping boundaries that once felt permanent. The air is filled with the scent of rain and earth, sharp and overwhelming. Scholars continue to examine whether these flood narratives reflect actual historical events or serve as symbolic representations of natural cycles and human vulnerability. Some researchers from Yale University suggest that catastrophic flooding in the region may have inspired these stories, embedding real experiences into myth. Argue that the consistency of flood myths across cultures points to shared psychological themes rather than a single historical event. You feel the weight of that uncertainty. The line between memory and meaning blurs like the land beneath rising water. The rain intensifies. The sound becomes constant, filling every space, leaving no room for silence. It is no longer gentle, it is relentless. One scandalous aside appears when you consider how these stories often include a single figure or small group chosen to survive. This suggests a belief not only in destruction, but in preservation, that even in the face of overwhelming change, something is meant to continue. You imagine a structure rising above the water, simple yet sturdy, built with urgency and purpose. Inside, there is stillness, a quiet contrast to the chaos outside. It is a space of waiting. The water continues to rise. It covers the fields, the paths, the foundations of what once stood firm. The world becomes unrecognizable, reduced to shifting surfaces and uncertain depth. And yet within this transformation there is no sense of finality, only change. No agreement has been reached on whether the flood narratives of Mesopotamia directly influence similar stories in later cultures or developed independently in response to shared environmental challenges. Some scholars from Princeton University suggest a transmission of ideas through trade and migration. Others believe that the recurrence of such stories reflects a universal human response to the power of nature. You allow that thought to settle, because here, surrounded by rising water and fading landmarks, the idea of universality feels natural. The experience of loss of uncertainty, of beginning again. The rain begins to soften, slowly at first, then more noticeably, until the steady roar fades into a gentle patter. The water remains vast and still reflecting the dim light of a sky that is beginning to clear. You feel the tension ease. The storm passes, leaving behind a world that is both familiar and changed. The air is cooler now, carrying a clean, fresh scent that replaces the heaviness of before. You remain still observing the quiet aftermath. The surface of the water is calm, almost mirror-like, reflecting the sky above, with a clarity that feels almost deliberate. It is as though the world has been reset, simplified, returned to something more elemental. And within that stillness, the presence of the Anunnaki feels different. Not distant, not abstract, but active, involved in both creation and destruction, in shaping not only the beginning, but the cycles that follow. Your thoughts slow further, settling into the calm that follows the storm. The idea that existence includes both order and disruption, that creation and change are not separate but connected. The water begins to recede slowly, revealing the land beneath. Shapes return, edges reform the world, rebuilding itself piece by piece. You sense that this story, like the water, will continue to move, carrying you forward, through survival, through renewal, and into the next layer of understanding. The water continues to withdraw slowly, revealing the contours of a world that feels both familiar and altered. The ground, once hidden beneath a reflective surface, emerges dark and heavy, marked by the passage of something powerful. You sense that what remains is not simply a return, but a beginning shaped by memory. The air is still, not empty, but settled, as though the world is pausing to consider what has just occurred. A faint scent of wet clay rises gently, mingled with the freshness left behind by receding waters. It is clean, almost quieting. For a moment it feels as though everything is waiting. Then movement returns. Figures emerge cautiously, stepping onto ground that feels softer than before, testing its stability with careful steps. There is no rush, only quiet observation. The world has changed, and they are learning it again. You watch as structures begin to take shape once more, not immediately, but gradually. Walls are rebuilt, paths are cleared, life resumes, guided by both necessity and memory. And within this rebuilding, something else strengthens. Authority. Records confirm, based on research from Yale University and the University of Oxford, that early Mesopotamian kings were often presented as chosen by the gods, or even descended from divine beings. In inscriptions and royal lists, rulers are described as intermediaries between the human world and the divine order, represented by figures like the Anunnaki. You begin to see how this idea settles into the newly formed world. After a great disruption, people seek stability. They look for something constant, something reliable. And in that search, the role of the king becomes more than practical. It becomes symbolic. You notice a figure standing slightly apart from the others, not distant but elevated in presence. Their posture is steady, their movements measured. Others glance toward them not with fear, but with quiet recognition. This is someone who carries meaning beyond themselves. A curious detail emerges when you consider how these rulers were portrayed. They were not simply leaders managing resources or organizing labor. They were often described as having a direct connection to the divine, as if their authority flowed from the same source that shaped the world itself. You feel the weight of that idea. To lead is not only to govern, but to represent something greater. The ground beneath your feet feels firmer now, though still marked by the recent flood. It holds a subtle unevenness, a reminder that stability is never permanent, yet life continues to build upon it. Scholars continue to examine whether claims of divine descent were sincerely believed or strategically emphasized to strengthen political authority. Some researchers from Stanford University suggest that linking kings to the Anunnaki reinforced unity and obedience within growing populations. Others, including perspectives from the University of Cambridge, argue that these beliefs were deeply integrated into the worldview of the time, making the distinction between belief and strategy difficult to separate. You sense that blend again. Belief and structure intertwined. The sky above is clear now, washed clean by the storm. The stars begin to reappear, faint at first, then more defined as darkness settles in. They seem unchanged, steady and distant, offering a quiet contrast to the shifting world below. One scandalous aside appears when you consider how royal inscriptions often emphasize the favor of the gods in times of success while attributing hardship to divine testing or human failure. This suggests a narrative carefully shaped to maintain authority even in the face of uncertainty. You imagine a gathering where stories of the flood are retold not only as memory, but as lesson. The survival of a chosen few, the rebuilding of the land, and the role of leadership in guiding that process. The voice of the king carries across the space, calm and assured. It does not need to be loud. It holds attention through presence alone. You feel the subtle shift in atmosphere. The uncertainty that followed the flood begins to settle into something more structured. Roles are re-established, responsibilities clarified. The world, though changed, finds its rhythm again. No agreement has been reached on whether early kings genuinely believed themselves to be connected to divine beings, or whether this connection was a narrative constructed over time. Some scholars from Princeton University suggest that repeated reinforcement of this idea across generations may have transformed it into accepted truth. Others propose that these beliefs were foundational from the beginning, shaping identity and leadership in ways that felt natural to those who lived within them. You allow that question to remain open, because here in this quiet rebuilding, the distinction feels less urgent than the effect itself. The city begins to rise again slowly but steadily. Walls take form, paths reappear. The soft glow of firelight returns, marking the presence of life continuing forward. And at the centre of it all, the figure of the king stands as both guide and symbol, a connection between the human and the divine. You sense how deeply this role influences everything around it. Decisions are not made in isolation. They are framed within a larger context, one that includes the will of the Anunnaki. This adds weight to every action, every choice, reinforcing the idea that leadership carries responsibility beyond the visible world. The air cools further as night settles in. A faint breeze moves through the newly formed spaces, carrying with it the scent of fresh clay and distant water. It is gentle, almost soothing, as though the world itself is finding balance again. You remain still observing the quiet restoration. The memory of the flood does not disappear. It lingers, shaping how people understand both vulnerability and resilience. And within that understanding, the role of divine authority becomes even more significant. Because if the world can change so suddenly, then guidance, whether human or divine, becomes something to hold on to. The stars above shine more clearly, now steady and constant. The earth below continues to rebuild, and between them, humanity finds its place once more, guided by leaders who claim a connection to the very forces that shaped existence itself. Your thoughts drift gently with that realization, the idea that power, belief, and survival are deeply connected. That authority is not only about control but about meaning, and that in the quiet spaces after great change, stories of divine connection become even more essential. The night deepens, the city steadies, and the story carries you forward. The rebuilt city settles into a quieter rhythm, as though each stone and pathway has remembered where it belongs. The presence of authority lingers gently in the background, now less visible, but still deeply felt. You sense that the connection between the human world and something beyond it is about to take a more deliberate form. Not in fields, not in floods, but in places designed for contact. The air shifts slightly as your awareness moves inward, away from open streets, and into a space that feels more contained. The sounds of the city soften behind thick walls, replaced by a stillness that carries intention. A faint scent of incense drifts through the air, warm and slightly sweet, mingling with the dry texture of stone. For a moment, it feels as though you are stepping into a place where the ordinary world pauses. The light here is different. It does not come from the wide sky above, but from controlled sources. Oil lamps placed carefully along walls, small flames that flicker gently, casting steady shadows that seem to move with quiet purpose. You stand within a temple. Records confirm, based on research from institutions such as the University of Chicago and Harvard University, that temples in ancient Mesopotamia served as both religious and administrative centers. These structures were not only places of worship, but also hubs of economic activity, storage, and governance. And within these spaces, the presence of the Anunnaki was not distant or abstract. It was immediate. You begin to notice how every element of the temple is arranged with care. The walls are thick, the ceilings high, creating a sense of separation from the outside world. The floor beneath your feet is smooth but cool, worn by countless steps taken with purpose and reverence. A curious detail emerges when you consider how these temples functioned. They were not open to everyone in the same way public spaces were. Access was often limited, controlled by those who held knowledge of rituals and traditions. This created a sense of mystery, a boundary between the everyday and the sacred. You feel that boundary now. It is not restrictive, but defining. The quiet within the temple is different from the quiet outside. It is intentional, almost expectant, as though something could happen at any moment, even if it rarely does. A figure moves slowly across the space, their steps measured and deliberate. They carry an object simple yet significant, placing it carefully at a central point within the room. It is an offering. You sense that this act is not symbolic alone. It is relational, an exchange between the human and the divine. Scholars continue to examine whether these rituals were understood as literal communication with divine beings or as structured practices that reinforced belief and community cohesion. Some researchers from Yale University suggest that the predictability of ritual helped create stability in uncertain environments. Others, including perspectives from Stanford University, argue that participants experience these moments as genuine interactions with higher powers. You feel the depth of that possibility, to stand in a place where the boundary between worlds feels thin, where actions are believed to carry meaning beyond what is seen. The scent of incense grows slightly stronger, its warmth grounding the space. It lingers gently, not overwhelming, but persistent enough to shape the atmosphere. One scandalous aside appears when you consider how much wealth and resources were concentrated within these temples. Offerings of grain goods and labour were regularly directed toward maintaining these sacred spaces. This suggests that temples held not only spiritual significance, but also considerable influence over the economic life of the city. You imagine the balance of that power to serve both the divine and the practical needs of a growing population. The central space of the temple feels almost like a point of focus where attention gathers naturally. You find your awareness drawn there, not by force but by quiet alignment. No agreement has been reached on whether temples were designed primarily as places to house the presence of the gods or as symbolic representations of cosmic order. Some scholars from the University of Cambridge suggest that the architecture itself reflects an attempt to mirror the structure of the universe. Others believe that these spaces were intended to create a sense of proximity to the divine, making the unseen feel more accessible. You allow that idea to settle, because here in this stillness, the distinction feels less important than the experience itself. The figure who placed the offering steps back their posture, calm and composed. There is no dramatic reaction, no visible sign that anything has changed, and yet the act feels complete. The connection has been made. The lamps flicker softly, their light steady despite the subtle movement of air within the space. Shadows shift gently along the walls, creating patterns that feel almost alive, though they remain grounded in the simple movement of flame. You notice the texture of the stone around you slightly rough, in places smoother where it has been touched repeatedly. It carries the memory of countless interactions, each one adding to the quiet presence of the space. Your thoughts slow further. The outside world feels distant now, its sounds muted by the thickness of the walls and the focus of this place. Time itself seems to move differently here, not measured by activity but by intention. You begin to understand how temples served as gateways, not in a literal sense, but in experience. They created a space where people could step out of the ordinary flow of life and enter something more reflective, more connected to their beliefs about the world and their place within it. The presence of the Anunnaki feels closer here, not because they're seen, but because the environment invites that perception. The air remains warm with incense, the lights remain soft, and the stillness holds everything gently in place. As your awareness continues to settle into this calm, focused space, you begin to sense how important these temples were in shaping not only belief, but identity. They were places where stories became rituals, where ideas became actions, and where the connection between humanity and the divine was practiced, reinforced and quietly sustained. The figure moves once more, preparing to leave. The offering remains. The space returns to stillness, and the story, like the soft flicker of the lamps, continues to guide you forward. The quiet of the temple lingers as you slowly drift outward again, leaving behind its enclosed stillness and returning to a broader awareness of the world. Yet something has changed. The sense of connection you felt inside those walls does not disappear. It follows you, subtle and persistent, like a thought that refuses to fully fade. The night sky greets you once more. It feels deeper now. The stars appear sharper, more deliberate, as though each one holds a place within a pattern you're only beginning to notice. You stand beneath them, the air cool against your skin, carrying faint traces of incense that have followed you from the temple. For a moment it feels as though the sky itself is a kind of text, not written in clay but in light. Your mind drifts upward, tracing invisible lines between distant points. Patterns begin to form, not fixed but suggestive. You sense how ancient observers might have done the same, searching for meaning in the arrangement of stars, finding stories where others might see only distance. Records confirm, based on research from institutions such as the University of California and Princeton University, that early Mesopotamian cultures developed detailed systems of astronomical observation. They tracked the movement of celestial bodies with remarkable precision, linking these patterns to both agricultural cycles and divine influence. And within this careful observation, the presence of the Anunnaki becomes intertwined with the sky itself. You begin to understand how symbols emerge from this connection. Not random markings, but representations of ideas drawn from both earth and sky. Each symbol carries layers of meaning shaped by observation, belief, and the desire to understand something vast. A curious detail arises when you consider how these symbols were used. They appear not only in written texts, but in art, architecture, and everyday objects. This suggests that they were more than decorative. They were part of a shared language, one that connected different aspects of life into a cohesive whole. You imagine a carved seal pressed gently into soft clay, leaving behind an image that represents both identity and belief. The lines are precise, the shapes deliberate, each one chosen for its significance. The air is still allowing the faint sounds of the city to drift upward. A distant voice, the soft movement of footsteps, the quiet presence of life continuing below. Yet your focus remains above. Scholars continue to examine whether the advanced astronomical knowledge of early Mesopotamian cultures was purely observational or influenced by deeper symbolic systems. Some researchers from Yale University suggest that these observations were driven by practical needs, such as predicting seasonal changes. Others, including perspectives from Stanford University, argue that the integration of celestial patterns into religious belief points to a more complex understanding of the relationship between the heavens and human life. You feel that connection now. The idea that what happens above might reflect or even influence what happens below. One scandalous aside appears when you consider how certain symbols associated with the Anunnaki have been interpreted in modern times. Some claim that these markings represent advanced knowledge or hidden messages beyond the understanding of the cultures that created them. While these interpretations are widely debated, they add another layer to the enduring mystery of these ancient symbols. You let that thought pass gently, because here, in this quiet moment, the symbols feel less like secrets and more like expressions, attempts to capture something that cannot be fully explained. The stars continue their slow movement across the sky, almost imperceptible, yet constant. You sense the passage of time, not through clocks or measurements, but through this gradual shift. No agreement has been reached on whether the symbolic systems of ancient Mesopotamia were primarily tools for communication or reflections of deeper philosophical ideas. Some scholars from the University of Cambridge suggest that these symbols evolved alongside language, becoming more complex as societies grew. Others believe they were always intended to represent concepts that extended beyond simple communication, touching on the nature of existence itself. You allow that uncertainty to remain, because the symbols like the stars do not demand a single interpretation. They invite observation. The cool air carries a faint hint of night-blooming plants, subtle and almost sweet, adding another layer to the sensory stillness around you. It grounds you, even as your thoughts reach outward. You begin to sense how deeply this connection between sky and symbol influenced the way people understood their world. The Anunnaki, once described in stories and recorded in clay, now seem to exist within the patterns of the heavens themselves. Their presence is not confined to a single place. It extends outward, woven into the fabric of the universe as it was perceived. You remain still, allowing that idea to settle. The notion that knowledge, whether practical or symbolic, is always shaped by perspective, by what is seen and how it is interpreted. The city below continues its quiet rhythm, largely unaware of the patterns you now observe. Or perhaps not unaware, but engaged in its own way through rituals, symbols, and shared understanding. The sky above remains vast. The stars continue their silent motion, and between them you find yourself suspended in a moment of reflection where ancient knowledge and human curiosity meet. Your thoughts slow further. The patterns soften. The need to define or conclude fades gently, replaced by a simple awareness of connection. The symbols, the stars, the stories, all part of a larger tapestry that continues to unfold. And as you drift deeper into that calm, the story carries you forward, guiding you toward what has been lost and what may still remain hidden. The stars remain above you, steady and distant, but your attention begins to lower once more, drifting away from the vast sky and returning to the earth. The patterns you traced in the heavens seem to echo faintly in the world below, as though something once aligned has slowly fallen out of reach. The air feels still, not empty but quiet in a different way, a quiet that carries absence rather than presence. The soft rhythm of life you sensed before has faded, replaced by a stillness that feels older, heavier. For a moment it feels as though you're standing where something once stood. The ground beneath your feet is uneven, scattered with fragments of what used to be whole, broken edges of stone, crumbled walls, the faint outlines of structures that no longer hold their shape. You move slowly through this space, aware that every step disturbs a surface that has remained undisturbed for a very long time. The scent here is dry, almost brittle, like dust warmed by sunlight and left untouched. It carries a sense of time, not in motion, but in accumulation. Records confirm, based on research from institutions such as the University of Chicago and the University of Oxford, that many ancient Mesopotamian cities were abandoned over time due to environmental changes, shifting rivers, and resource depletion. These once thriving centers gradually fell into ruin, leaving behind physical traces of complex societies that no longer exist. You begin to see those traces more clearly. A wall that once marked a boundary, a foundation that once supported a structure filled with life, a path that once guided movement, now barely visible beneath layers of dust. A curious detail emerges when you consider how much of this history was lost simply because it was buried. Entire cities preserved not through deliberate care, but through the slow covering of time. Sand, soil, and silence layered over stories that once felt immediate and urgent. You kneel or perhaps simply lean closer, noticing the texture of the ground. Fine particles shift beneath your imagined touch, revealing hints of what lies beneath. It is not gone, it is hidden. The quiet deepens. Scholars continue to examine how much knowledge has been lost due to the incomplete nature of archaeological discovery. Some researchers from Yale University suggest that only a small fraction of ancient Mesopotamian sites have been fully excavated, leaving vast amounts of information still buried. Others, including perspectives from Stanford University, argue that even with ongoing discoveries, the full context of these civilizations may never be completely understood. You feel that sense of incompleteness, the idea that what remains is only part of a much larger story. The wind moves gently across the ruins, lifting small traces of dust into the air before letting them settle again. It is a soft movement, almost respectful, as though the land itself is careful not to disturb what has been left behind. One scandalous aside appears when you consider how some early excavations were conducted. In the rush to uncover artifacts, certain details may have been overlooked or even damaged, altering the way these sites are understood today. This reminds you that the act of discovery is not always perfect. You pause. The fragments around you do not feel broken in the usual sense. They feel paused, as if time simply stopped here, leaving everything in place waiting. The connection to the Anunnaki feels different now, not present in active belief or daily life, but embedded within what remains. In the symbols carved into stone, in the layouts of structures, in the quiet evidence of a worldview that once shaped everything. No agreement has been reached on whether the decline of these ancient cities was primarily due to environmental factors or influenced by social and political changes. Some scholars from Princeton University emphasize the impact of shifting river systems and agricultural challenges. Others suggest that internal conflicts and changing belief systems may have played a significant role. You allow that uncertainty to remain, because here, surrounded by what is left, the cause feels less immediate than the result. The stillness, the absence of voices, the quiet persistence of what remains. You walk slowly through the ruins, each step careful, not out of fear, but out of awareness. This is a place that holds memory, even if it cannot speak. The sky above is pale now, not yet fully bright, but no longer dark. It casts a soft, even light across the landscape, revealing details without sharp contrast. Everything feels muted, balanced between presence and absence. You begin to sense how time changes not only the physical world, but the stories attached to it. What was once clear becomes uncertain. What was once central becomes distant, and yet something endures. The idea of the Anunnaki, though no longer actively shaping daily life in this place, remains within the fragments. It lingers in the patterns, in the symbols, in the very structure of what was built. You feel a quiet respect for that endurance, the way stories can persist even when the world that created them fades. Your thoughts slow further, settling into the calm that this place offers. There is no urgency here, no demand for answers, only the gentle presence of what has been and the quiet acknowledgement of what is no longer. The wind moves again, softer this time, carrying with it a faint trace of something distant, perhaps the memory of water, perhaps simply the movement of air across open land. You remain still. The ruins do not change. They simply exist, and in that existence they offer a different kind of understanding. Not through active narrative, but through presence. The story continues not in the way it once did, but in the way it is remembered. And as you stand within this quiet landscape of remnants and echoes, you begin to sense that what has been lost is only part of what remains to be discovered. The earth holds its secrets. The silence keeps them. And the story, though fragmented, continues to guide you forward. The stillness of the ruins lingers in your awareness, but something begins to shift again, gently at first. The quiet dust beneath your feet feels less like an ending now, and more like a pause waiting to be interrupted. The silence is no longer empty, it feels expectant. You notice a new sound, faint at first, almost out of place. A careful brushing, steady and deliberate, as though someone is clearing away time itself, layer by layer. The air carries a slightly different scent, now dry still, but mixed with something sharper, like disturbed earth, newly exposed to light. For a moment, it feels as though the past is being uncovered right in front of you. Your mind drifts forward beyond the ancient world you have been resting in, into a much later time, where people return to these forgotten places with questions rather than certainty. They do not build here, they search. You see hands again, but different this time. Gloved, careful, precise, they move slowly across the surface of the ground, brushing away dust to reveal something beneath. A shape begins to form, not a wall, not a path, a tablet. Records confirm, based on research from institutions such as the University of Pennsylvania, and the University of Oxford that many of the most important Mesopotamian texts were rediscovered during archaeological excavations in the 19th and 20th centuries. These findings transformed modern understanding of early civilizations, bringing long-lost stories back into view. You feel a subtle shift in perspective. The story is no longer only being lived, it is being rediscovered. The tablet is lifted carefully, its surface still bearing the marks pressed into it thousands of years ago. The symbols once part of a living culture now appear as a puzzle waiting to be understood. A curious detail emerges when you consider how fragile this process is. These tablets, hardened by time, survived not through deliberate preservation, but often by accident, buried and protected by the very forces that erased the cities above them. You watch as the tablet is examined. Light catches its surface, revealing the intricate patterns of cuneiform writing. To the untrained eye, it might seem abstract, but to those who study it, each mark carries meaning, structure, and tension. The air feels slightly cooler now, as though time itself has shifted. Scholars began the slow process of translation, working carefully to interpret these ancient symbols. It was not immediate. It required patience, comparison, and a deep commitment to understanding a language that had been silent for millennia. Some of the earliest breakthroughs came when repeated patterns were identified, allowing researchers to assign sounds and meanings to specific symbols. This opened the door to entire narratives that had been hidden in plain sight. You sense the quiet excitement of that moment, not loud or dramatic, but profound. The realization that the past is not entirely lost, that it can speak again even after thousands of years. Scholars continue to examine how accurately these translations reflect the original meanings of the texts. Some researchers from Yale University suggest that while much progress has been made, certain nuances may still be misunderstood or incomplete. Others, including perspectives from Stanford University, argue that the consistency of translation across multiple texts provides strong confidence in the interpretations. You feel that familiar tension, the balance between discovery and uncertainty. The tablet is placed gently among others, each one a fragment of a larger story. Together they begin to form a picture not perfectly clear, but increasingly detailed. One scandalous aside appears when you consider how some early interpretations of these texts were influenced by the expectations and beliefs of the scholars studying them. In some cases, meanings were shaped not only by the symbols themselves, but by the desire to fit them into familiar frameworks. You let that thought settle, because it reminds you that understanding the past is not only about what is found, but how it is interpreted. The space around you feels different now, less like a ruin, more like a place of transition. The past and present overlap here, connected through the act of discovery. You imagine a room filled with these tablets, each one catalogued, studied, compared. The quiet focus of those who dedicate themselves to this work creates its own kind of stillness, one that mirrors the calm you have been drifting through. No agreement has been reached on whether all existing tablets have been discovered, or if significant portions of ancient Mesopotamian literature remain buried. Some scholars from Princeton University suggest that ongoing excavations will continue to reveal new material for decades to come. Others believe that while many important texts have been found, the complete picture may never be fully assembled. You allow that possibility to remain open, because the idea that something is still waiting to be found adds a quiet sense of continuation to the story. The tablet you first noticed rests quietly, now its surface unchanged, yet its meaning slowly unfolding through careful study. It is no longer silent. It speaks, not loudly, not clearly at first, but steadily revealing fragments of a world that once felt immediate and alive. And within those fragments, the names of the Anunnaki appear again, not as distant myths, but as recorded figures embedded in texts that describe their roles, their actions, their influence. You feel the connection deepen. The story you have been drifting through is not only imagined, it is documented, preserved in ways that allow it to reach across time. Your thoughts slow further, settling into the quiet rhythm of discovery, the careful brushing of dust, the lifting of a tablet, the gradual unfolding of meaning, each step bringing the past a little closer. The air remains calm, the light steady, and the story, once buried beneath layers of time, continues to rise gently into awareness, guiding you toward the interpretations that will shape what comes next. The quiet rhythm of discovery lingers like a steady breath that continues even after the moment has passed. The tablets you have just seen do not disappear from your awareness. Instead, they shift, carried from the excavation site into places of study, where their meanings begin to unfold in new and unexpected ways. The air feels different now, less earthy, more enclosed, touched by the faint scent of paper-polished wood, and something almost metallic, like the quiet presence of tools designed for precision. You sense a room filled not with ruins, but with attention. For a moment, it feels as though you are standing within a space where the past is being translated into understanding. A table rests before you, its surface scattered with copies of ancient texts, notes written carefully in modern hands, and small fragments of clay placed with deliberate care. Light falls evenly across the room, not flickering like a flame, but steady and controlled. You notice how the symbols you once saw carved into tablets are now reproduced on paper, their shapes traced and studied, compared and reinterpreted. Records confirm, based on research from institutions such as Columbia University and the University of California, that the translation of Mesopotamian texts opened entirely new fields of study, allowing scholars to reconstruct aspects of ancient belief systems, including detailed accounts of the Anunnaki and their roles within early mythology. You begin to sense how this process transforms the story. What was once a lived belief becomes an object of analysis, something to be examined, questioned, and understood from a distance. A curious detail emerges when you consider how interpretation works. The same symbol can carry multiple meanings depending on context, and early translators often had to make choices guided by patterns, but also by intuition. You imagine a scholar pausing, looking closely at a line of text, weighing its possible meanings. The room is quiet, the only sound the soft turning of a page or the faint scratch of a pen. The story of the Anunnaki begins to take shape again, but this time through a different lens. No longer just belief, now interpretation. Scholars continue to debate the accuracy and implications of these translations. Some researchers from Yale University suggest that early interpretations may have been influenced by limited understanding of the language, leading to revisions as knowledge expanded. Others, including perspectives from Stanford University, argue that the core meanings of many texts have remained consistent despite ongoing refinement. You feel that familiar sense of uncertainty, not unsettling but present. The idea that understanding is always evolving, shaped by new discoveries and shifting perspectives. One scandalous aside appears when you consider how certain interpretations of these texts moved beyond academic circles. As translations became more widely available, some readers began to see connections that scholars did not emphasize, drawing conclusions that extended beyond traditional historical frameworks. These interpretations often focused on the more unusual aspects of the texts, descriptions of powerful beings descending from the heavens, accounts of creation that seemed to some almost technological in nature. You sense how easily the story could begin to change here. The quiet, careful work of translation gives way to more imaginative possibilities, where the line between myth and speculation becomes less clear. The room around you remains calm, grounded in study and analysis, yet the ideas within it begin to stretch outward, reaching beyond the boundaries of academic understanding. No agreement has been reached on whether these alternative interpretations hold any historical validity or simply reflect modern attempts to reinterpret ancient myths through contemporary perspectives. Some scholars from Princeton University emphasize the importance of contextualizing these texts within their original cultural framework. Others acknowledge that the enduring mystery of the Anunnaki invites a wide range of interpretations, not all of which can be easily dismissed. You allow that tension to remain because it mirrors the broader journey you have been taking. From belief to record, from record to interpretation, and now from interpretation to possibility. The light in the room remains steady, illuminating each detail without distortion. It creates a sense of clarity, even as the ideas being explored become more complex. You notice how the symbols, once distant and abstract, now feel almost familiar. Their shapes, their patterns, their repeated presence across different texts begin to form a kind of language you can sense, even if you cannot fully read it. The story of the Anunnaki is no longer confined to ancient voices. It is being retold, re-examined, reimagined. You feel a subtle shift in your thoughts. The calm you have been drifting in remains, but it now carries a hint of curiosity, a gentle pull toward questions that do not demand immediate answers. What did these beings represent? How were they understood by those who first spoke of them? And how do those interpretations change as they pass through time? The room remains quiet. The work continues. Each translation, each interpretation, adding another layer to a story that refuses to settle into a single form. The air feels still yet full, not with noise but with thought. And as you allow yourself to rest within that stillness, you begin to sense that the story is about to move beyond the boundaries of careful study into a space where imagination and interpretation begin to intertwine more freely. The tablets remain, the words endure, and the story carried through time and thought continues to unfold. The quiet room of study lingers in your awareness, but something begins to shift again, gently at first, like a thought drifting beyond its original boundaries. The steady light, the careful notes, the measured pace of interpretation, all remain, yet the ideas themselves begin to stretch outward, moving into less certain territory. You sense curiosity changing shape. It becomes less restrained, less anchored to strict method, and more open to possibility. The air feels slightly different now, touched by a subtle energy, as though questions are no longer content to remain unanswered. For a moment, it feels as though the story is stepping into a wider world. The symbols on the tablets, once approached with caution and precision, begin to take on new interpretations in the minds of those who encounter them outside academic spaces. The descriptions of the Anunnaki, their connection to the heavens, their role in creation, begin to invite a different kind of question. Not what did these people believe, but what if those beliefs were based on something more? Records confirm, based on research from institutions such as Stanford University and the University of Chicago, that mainstream archaeology and history consistently interpret the Anunnaki as mythological figures within the religious systems of ancient Mesopotamia. These interpretations are grounded in comparative mythology, linguistic analysis, and archaeological context. And yet beyond that framework, alternative ideas begin to emerge. You feel the shift. The calm, steady rhythm of scholarship gives way to a more speculative tone, where imagination begins to play a larger role. A curious detail arises when you consider how certain descriptions within the texts have been re-examined. References to beings descending from the sky, possessing great knowledge and influencing human development, have been interpreted by some as evidence of contact with advanced, non-human intelligences. You pause. The idea does not demand belief, but it invites consideration. The room around you feels less defined now, as though the boundaries between past and present, fact and interpretation, are softening. The steady light remains, but it now illuminates a wider range of possibilities. Scholars continue to debate the validity of these interpretations. Many researchers from Yale University and the University of Cambridge emphasize that such readings often remove the texts from their cultural and historical context, leading to conclusions that are not supported by evidence. Others acknowledge that the enduring fascination with these ideas reflects a deep human curiosity about origins and the possibility of contact beyond Earth. You feel that balance again, the pull between grounded understanding and expansive imagination. One scandalous aside appears when you consider how popular media has amplified these alternative interpretations. Books, documentaries, and discussions have brought the idea of ancient astronauts into mainstream awareness, presenting the Anunnaki not as mythological figures, but as visitors from beyond the Earth. You imagine how compelling that narrative can be. The idea that humanity's origins are connected to something vast and unknown. That the stories preserved in ancient texts are not symbolic but historical accounts of encounters that shaped the course of human development. The thought lingers not as certainty, but as possibility. No agreement has been reached on whether any credible evidence supports the claim that the Anunnaki were extraterrestrial beings. Scholars from Princeton University and the University of California consistently point to the lack of empirical data supporting such theories. At the same time, proponents argue that the absence of evidence does not necessarily mean absence of truth, suggesting that current methods of investigation may be limited. You allow that tension to remain because it reflects the broader nature of this story. A narrative that exists at the intersection of history, belief, and imagination. The symbols on the page seem to shift slightly as you look at them now. Not physically, but in meaning. What once felt like a clear representation of myth now carries additional layers shaped by the perspectives of those who interpret it. The air feels still yet charged with thought. You begin to sense how stories evolve, how they move from one context to another, changing shape as they go, influenced by the questions and beliefs of each new generation. The Anunnaki, once firmly rooted in ancient Mesopotamian belief systems, now exist in multiple forms. Mythological figures, symbols of cosmic order, possible visitors from beyond. Each interpretation adds to the complexity, making the story richer but also more uncertain. You feel a quiet acceptance of that complexity. The need for a single answer fades slightly, replaced by an appreciation for the layers themselves. The room around you remains calm, though its boundaries feel less fixed. It is no longer just a place of study. It is a space where ideas expand, where interpretations are explored, where certainty is not always the goal. Your thoughts slow again, settling into a gentle rhythm. The curiosity remains, but it softens, becoming less urgent, more reflective. The story continues to unfold, not in a straight line, but in widening circles. Each layer revealing something new, each perspective adding depth. And as you drift further into that calm, you begin to sense that the next step will bring you back toward a more grounded understanding, where these ideas are examined through the lens of science, carefully, thoughtfully, without losing the sense of wonder that has carried you this far. The symbols remain, the questions linger, and the story, balanced between imagination and evidence, continues to guide you forward. The widening circle of ideas begins to settle, gently drawing your attention back towards something more grounded. The sense of speculation remains, but it softens like ripples fading across still water. You feel a quiet return to careful observation, to the steady rhythm of inquiry shaped by patience rather than urgency. The space around you shifts once more. It becomes clearer, more defined, filled with a calm sense of structure. The air carries a faint neutral scent, neither earthy nor sweet, but clean and controlled. It feels like a place designed for thinking. For a moment, it feels as though you're standing at the intersection of curiosity and method. You notice surfaces arranged with precision, instruments resting neatly, screens or pages displaying information in ordered form. Everything here suggests a desire not just to wonder, but to understand. Records confirm, based on research from institutions such as Harvard University and the University of California, that modern science approaches questions of human origin through disciplines like archaeology, genetics, and evolutionary biology. These fields rely on evidence that can be tested, measured, and compared across time. And within this framework, the story of the Anunnaki is viewed differently. You sense the shift clearly. Where earlier interpretations allowed for open speculation, here the focus is narrower, more precise. Claims are examined carefully, weighed against available data, and accepted or questioned based on evidence. A curious detail emerges when you consider how science handles extraordinary ideas. It does not dismiss them immediately, but it requires strong, consistent evidence before accepting them as valid. This creates a balance between openness and skepticism. You feel that balance now. It is steady, calm, and deliberate. Scholars continue to examine claims related to ancient astronaut theories with careful scrutiny. Researchers from institutions such as Yale University and Stanford University emphasize that while ancient texts describe powerful beings, there is no verifiable evidence that these accounts represent extraterrestrial contact. Instead, they are understood within the cultural and symbolic frameworks of the societies that produced them. You let that perspective settle gently. It does not remove the mystery entirely, but it reshapes it. The idea of the Anunnaki shifts from possible visitors to meaningful figures within human storytelling, reflecting the ways early societies understood their world. One scandalous aside appears when you consider how easily modern perspectives can influence the interpretation of ancient texts. Concepts like advanced technology or space travel, familiar to you now, were not part of the worldview of ancient Mesopotamian cultures. Applying these ideas retroactively can create interpretations that feel compelling but lack historical grounding. You sense the importance of context, the need to understand a story within the time and place it was created rather than through the lens of later developments. The room remains quiet, its atmosphere steady and focused. There is no rush here, no pressure to reach immediate conclusions, only the ongoing process of examination. No agreement has been reached on how best to balance openness to new ideas with the need for rigorous evidence. Some scholars from Princeton University advocate for maintaining strict standards to preserve the integrity of scientific inquiry. Others suggest that remaining open to unconventional possibilities can sometimes lead to unexpected discoveries. Even if most such ideas do not ultimately prove valid, you allow that tension to remain, because it reflects the nature of inquiry itself. A continuous movement between questioning and testing, between imagination and verification. The information before you feels clear, yet not limiting. It offers a framework, a way of understanding that is grounded, but still aware of its own boundaries. You begin to sense how this approach complements the earlier layers of the story. The myths, the symbols, the interpretations, all of them contribute to a broader understanding, even if they are viewed differently within a scientific context. Your thoughts slow further, aligning with the calm precision of this space. The need to resolve every question fades. Instead, there is a quiet appreciation for the process itself, the careful gathering of evidence, the thoughtful consideration of possibilities, the willingness to adjust understanding as new information emerges. The presence of the Anunnaki, once vivid and immediate, now exists within this framework as part of human cultural history. Their significance remains not as literal beings influencing events, but as powerful symbols that shaped how people understood their origins and their place in the world. You feel a subtle clarity in that realization. The story does not lose its meaning. It changes form. The room remains still, the light steady, and within that calm the story continues to evolve, guided by both curiosity and discipline. You sense that the next step will move even closer to the question of human origins, not through myth alone, but through the lens of science, where evidence is traced, not in stories, but in the very structure of life itself. The balance holds, the questions remain, and the story carries you gently forward. The steady clarity of that structured space lingers for a while, like a calm surface that reflects everything without distortion. Your thoughts feel lighter here, more organized, as if each idea has found a place where it can rest without pressure. Then slowly your awareness begins to narrow, not outward towards stars or ruins, but inward, towards something smaller, something hidden. The air feels almost weightless now, stripped of scent and sound, as though you're stepping into a space beyond the physical world you have been exploring. It is quiet, in a different way, not empty, but precise. For a moment it feels as though you're looking at life itself, not as story, but as structure. You imagine a thread, long, delicate, coiled in ways that seem impossibly intricate. It exists within every living thing, carrying instructions written in patterns too small to see yet powerful enough to shape entire organisms. Records confirm, based on research from institutions such as Harvard University and the University of California, that human evolution is understood through genetic evidence, fossil records, and comparative biology. These studies trace the development of modern humans over hundreds of thousands of years, showing gradual change rather than sudden creation. You feel the quiet weight of that timeline. It stretches far beyond any single story, unfolding slowly across landscapes and generations. A curious detail emerges when you consider how similar human DNA is across all populations. Despite differences in appearance, the genetic code that defines humanity is remarkably consistent, pointing to a shared origin deep in the past. You pause with that thought, a single origin, a long journey. The thread you imagined begins to feel more real, not as a visible object, but as a concept that connects everything you have encountered so far. The myths of creation, the stories of divine shaping, now meet a different kind of explanation, one based on gradual change, on adaptation, on time. Scholars continue to examine the details of human evolution, refining, understanding as new discoveries emerge. Researchers from Stanford University and Yale University emphasize that while the broad framework of evolution is well supported, specific pathways and timelines continue to be studied and debated. You feel that familiar openness again. Not uncertainty in a troubling sense, but the recognition that knowledge is always expanding. One scandalous aside appears when you consider how the idea of human origins has often been a source of tension between different ways of understanding the world. Scientific explanations based on evolution do not always align with traditional creation stories, leading to ongoing discussions about how these perspectives can coexist. You let that thought settle gently, because here in this quiet space of reflection, the two do not need to compete. They can exist as different ways of exploring the same question. The thread of life continues to unfold in your mind. You imagine it stretching backward through time, connecting you to countless generations, each one carrying forward small changes that gradually shaped what you are today. No agreement has been reached on whether certain aspects of human development occurred more rapidly than currently understood, or if there are gaps in the evolutionary record that remain unexplained. Some scholars from Princeton University suggest that ongoing discoveries may refine timelines further. Others believe that the existing framework already provides a strong and coherent explanation for human origins. You allow that possibility to remain because it reflects the nature of inquiry, always moving, always refining. The space around you remains calm, almost abstract, as though the physical world has faded to allow this deeper layer of understanding to take focus. You begin to sense how the question of the Anunnaki intersects with this. If humans were shaped by gradual processes over immense spans of time, then where do those ancient stories fit? Are they symbolic reflections of this long journey expressed in a way that early societies could understand? Or are they something else entirely? The question lingers, but it does not demand an answer. Your thoughts slow, further settling into the quiet rhythm of this exploration. The idea of life as a continuous process, the understanding that complexity emerges over time, not in sudden moments, but through countless small changes. The thread remains unbroken. It connects everything. The past, the present, the stories, the science, all part of a larger narrative that continues to unfold. You feel a subtle sense of calm in that connection. The need to separate or define fades slightly, replaced by an appreciation for the layers themselves. The myths of creation, the records of ancient civilizations, the careful work of modern science. Each offers a perspective, each adds depth. The space remains still, the thread continues, and as your awareness drifts gently along that line, you begin to sense that the next step will bring these layers together, exploring how similar ideas appear across different cultures and what that might reveal about the shared nature of human thought. The connection holds, the questions remain soft, and the story carries you forward. The delicate thread of life remains in your awareness, stretching quietly through time, connecting moments that once felt separate. As you follow it, your sense of place begins to widen again, expanding beyond a single region, beyond one civilization, into something broader. The air shifts. It carries a subtle blend of unfamiliar scents, now hints of distant lands you have not yet seen. Warm earth, dry grass, faint traces of wood smoke, carried across open spaces. The world feels larger. For a moment, it feels as though you're standing everywhere at once, not physically, but in awareness. The thread you follow does not belong to one place alone. It extends across continents, across cultures, linking stories that developed independently, yet share something strangely familiar. You begin to notice the patterns, different voices, different landscapes, yet similar ideas emerging again and again. Stories of creation, of beings from above, of humanity shaped with purpose. Records confirm, based on research from institutions such as the University of Cambridge and Harvard University, that many ancient cultures developed creation myths with overlapping themes, including divine involvement in the formation of humans and the structure of the world. These similarities have been studied extensively within the field of comparative mythology. You feel the quiet resonance of that idea, the possibility that different groups of people separated by distance and time arrived at similar ways of understanding their existence. A curious detail emerges when you consider how these stories differ even as they align. Each culture shapes its narrative according to its environment, its experiences, its needs. Yet beneath those differences, certain elements remain consistent. The presence of higher beings, the act of creation, the search for meaning. You imagine standing in a distant land far from the rivers of Mesopotamia, yet hearing a story that echoes the one you have already encountered. Different names, different symbols, but the same underlying question. Where did we come from? The air feels alive with these echoes. Scholars continue to examine whether these similarities are the result of shared origins or independent development. Some researchers from Yale University suggest that early human migrations may have carried certain narrative structures across regions, allowing them to evolve into distinct yet related myths. Others, including perspectives from Stanford University, argue that these similarities reflect universal aspects of human cognition, where similar questions lead to similar answers. You feel that balance again. Connection and coincidence intertwined. One scandalous aside appears when you consider how some modern interpretations attempt to link these global myths into a single unified narrative, suggesting that all such stories point to the same historical event or set of beings. While this idea is compelling, it remains highly debated and lacks consistent supporting evidence. You let that thought drift gently past, because the value of these stories does not depend on a single origin. It lies in their persistence, the way they continue to appear in different forms across different times and places. No agreement has been reached on whether the similarities between global myths indicate a shared ancestral story or reflect the natural tendencies of human imagination. Some scholars from Princeton University emphasize the role of cultural exchange in shaping these narratives. Others believe that certain themes emerge independently because they address fundamental aspects of human experience. You allow that uncertainty to remain because it adds depth rather than confusion. The world around you feels vast now, filled with voices that overlap without merging. Each one tells its own version of creation, of purpose, of connection to something greater. And within that vastness, the story of the Anunnaki takes on a new dimension. It is no longer isolated. It becomes part of a larger pattern, one thread among many, each contributing to a broader tapestry of human thought. You feel a quiet sense of unity in that realization, not a forced connection, but a natural one. The understanding that while cultures differ, the questions they ask often remain the same. The air cools slightly as your awareness settles. The scents fade into something more neutral, allowing your focus to rest on the ideas themselves rather than the environment. You begin to sense how this broader perspective changes the way you view the earlier parts of the story. The Anunnaki are still significant, their narratives still rich and detailed, but they now exist within a wider context, one that includes countless other interpretations of the same fundamental questions. Your thoughts slow further. The need to compare or contrast fades, replaced by a simple recognition of diversity within unity. The thread of life continues to connect everything. The myths, the cultures, the questions, all part of a shared human experience that stretches across time and space. You remain still, allowing that understanding to settle. The world feels both larger and more connected. The stories feel both distinct and related. And as you drift gently within that balance, you begin to sense that the next step will bring you closer to the influence these beliefs had on shaping human behavior, power structures, and the unfolding of history itself. The thread remains unbroken. The patterns continue, and the story carries you forward. The wide tapestry of stories gently settles in your awareness, threads no longer stretching outward, but slowly weaving back together. The vastness you sensed begins to focus, not shrinking, but concentrating into something more immediate. The air feels warmer again, familiar, grounded. You sense the return of human presence, not just as individuals moving through space, but as communities shaped by shared belief. The quiet patterns of myth and meaning begin to take form in actions, in choices in the structures that guide daily life. For a moment it feels as though you are watching history, not as a series of events, but as a gradual shaping of behavior. You notice how belief does not remain abstract. It becomes law, custom, expectation. Records confirm, based on research from institutions such as Harvard University and the University of Chicago that early Mesopotamian legal and social systems were deeply influenced by religious beliefs. Concepts of justice, authority, and responsibility were often framed within the context of divine order, linking human actions to the will of higher powers. You begin to see how this unfolds. A gathering takes place, not chaotic but structured, guided by roles that feel both assigned and accepted. Decisions are made not only through discussion, but through reference to something greater than those present. The presence of the Anunnaki, though not visible, shapes the outcome. A curious detail emerges when you consider how laws were presented in these early societies. They were not always described as human inventions. Instead, they were often framed as reflections of divine will, giving them a sense of permanence and authority that extended beyond individual leaders. You feel the weight of that idea. To follow a law is not only to obey a ruler, but to align with a larger order. The space around you carries a quiet sense of structure. Voices are calm, measured, as though each word is chosen carefully. There is no rush, no disorder, only the steady unfolding of decisions that will shape the lives of many. Scholars continue to examine how belief in divine authority influenced the development of social systems. Some researchers from Yale University suggest that linking laws to the will of the gods helped maintain stability and cohesion within growing populations. Others, including perspectives from Stanford University, argue that this connection also reinforced existing power structures, making them more difficult to challenge. You feel that dual nature, stability and control intertwined. One scandalous aside appears when you consider how leaders could interpret divine will in ways that supported their own authority. By claiming alignment with higher powers, decisions could be presented as unquestionable, even when they served specific interests. You let that thought settle gently, not as judgment but as observation, because it reflects a recurring pattern in human history: the use of belief to shape behavior, to guide action, to establish order. The air carries a faint trace of warmth, like sun on stone, grounding the moment in something tangible. It reminds you that these systems were not abstract theories. They were lived experiences, shaping how people interacted, worked, and understood their place in the world. No agreement has been reached on whether the integration of religious belief into governance was primarily a practical strategy or a natural extension of worldview. Some scholars from Princeton University emphasize the functional benefits of such systems in maintaining order. Others believe that for many early societies, the separation between the sacred and the secular simply did not exist. You allow that perspective to remain open, because here in this moment the distinction feels less relevant than the effect. The gathering continues, decisions are made, roles are reinforced, and through it all, the presence of the Anunnaki remains a quiet influence, shaping not only belief but action. You begin to sense how deeply this connection influenced the course of history, not through dramatic intervention, but through the steady guidance of human behavior. The way people organized themselves, the way they understood authority, the way they justified their actions. Your thoughts slow further, settling into the calm rhythm of observation. The patterns become clearer. Belief leads to structure. Structure leads to continuity. Continuity shapes history. The space around you remains steady, its atmosphere calm and focused. There is no need for urgency, no pressure to interpret beyond what is present. Only the quiet recognition of how ideas become systems and how those systems endure. You feel a subtle sense of clarity in that understanding. The story of the Anunnaki is not only about origins or myths, it is about influence. The quiet, persistent shaping of how people think, act and organize their world. The warmth of the air softens slightly as time passes. The gathering disperses, the decisions remain, and the patterns continue extending beyond this moment into the unfolding of history itself. As your awareness drifts gently forward, you begin to sense that the next step will bring a closer examination of how these ideas are questioned, challenged, and reinterpreted over time. The structures hold, the beliefs endure, and the story carries you onward. The quiet order of that gathering fades gently, like a pattern dissolving into softer lines. The structures you observe do not disappear, but they begin to loosen as though time itself is gently testing their strength. You sense a shift, not sudden but gradual. The air feels cooler now, sharper. There is a clarity to it, like the moment just before a question is asked. For a moment it feels as though the story itself is being examined, not accepted, not rejected, but questioned. You notice figures again, but their posture is different from those who built, ruled, or followed. These are observers, thinkers, people who do not simply inherit belief, but look at it closely, turning it slowly, considering its edges. The space around you feels open, not confined by walls or temples. The sky above is pale, almost neutral, offering light without direction. It creates an atmosphere where nothing is hidden, yet nothing is forced. Records confirm, based on research from institutions such as the University of California and Princeton University, that modern historical and archaeological methods rely on critical analysis, peer review, and evidence-based reasoning to evaluate ancient texts and beliefs. These approaches have reshaped how stories like those of the Anunnaki are understood today. You feel that shift clearly. The story is no longer simply told, it is examined. A curious detail emerges when you consider how evidence is treated in this process. It is not enough for an idea to be compelling. It must be supported by consistent findings, tested against other explanations, and able to withstand careful scrutiny. You imagine a fragment of text placed before a group of scholars. Each one studies it quietly, not searching for confirmation but for understanding. The silence here is different. It is active. Scholars continue to debate the interpretation of ancient Mesopotamian texts, especially when they're used to support unconventional theories. Researchers from Yale University emphasize the importance of context, language, and cultural background when analyzing these materials. Others, including perspectives from Stanford University, stress that removing these elements can lead to misinterpretation even when the original text is accurately translated. You feel the weight of that responsibility. To understand something fully, you must consider where it comes from. One scandalous aside appears when you consider how easily information can be reshaped once it leaves its original context. A single line from an ancient text, when isolated, can seem to suggest meanings that were never intended. This has led to debates not only about what the texts say, but about how they are used. You let that thought settle gently, because it reflects a broader truth. That knowledge is not only about discovery, but about interpretation. The air remains clear, the light steady. You begin to sense how skepticism plays a role in this process, not as doubt for its own sake, but as a tool for refinement. To question is not to dismiss, it is to understand more deeply. No agreement has been reached on how much weight should be given to alternative interpretations of ancient texts. Some scholars from the University of Cambridge argue that while creativity in interpretation can inspire new ideas, it must be grounded in evidence to be considered valid. Others believe that exploring unconventional perspectives, even if they are not ultimately supported, can still contribute to the broader conversation. You allow that balance to remain because it reflects the nature of inquiry, a continuous movement between openness and discipline. The figures around you remain focused, their attention steady, their approach careful. There is no urgency here, no need to reach immediate conclusions, only the ongoing process of questioning, comparing, refining. You feel a subtle calm in that. The idea that understanding does not require certainty, only patience. The story of the Anunnaki, once accepted as part of a living belief system, now exists within this framework of analysis. Its meanings are explored, its origins traced, its interpretations weighed. It does not lose its significance. It changes form. The sky above remains pale, its light even and consistent. It creates a sense of openness where ideas can be examined without distortion. Your thoughts slow further. The need to choose between belief and skepticism fades. Instead, you find yourself resting in the space between them, a place where questions are allowed to exist without immediate answers. The air remains cool, the space remains quiet, and within that calm, the story continues to evolve, shaped by those who seek to understand, not only as a narrative, but as a reflection of human thought, You begin to sense that the final step is approaching, a return to stillness, a moment of reflection that gathers everything you have experienced and allows it to settle into something simple, something quiet. The questions remain, the search continues, and the story carries you gently toward its closing horizon. The cool clarity of questioning slowly softens like a surface smoothing after gentle ripples. The careful analysis, the weighing of evidence, the quiet debates all begin to settle into something less structured, more reflective. You feel the tension ease, not disappearing but loosening, as though the need to define every answer has gently stepped aside. The air grows warmer again, carrying a softness that feels familiar, almost comforting. For a moment, it feels as though you are returning not to a place, but to a feeling. The story, with all its layers, myths, evidence, questions, and interpretations, begins to gather into something whole. You notice how the idea of the Anunnaki remains, not fixed in one meaning, not confined to one explanation, but present, persistent. Records confirm, based on research from institutions such as Harvard University and the University of Cambridge, that ancient myths continue to influence modern culture, shaping literature, film, and collective imagination. These stories endure not because they are proven, but because they resonate with enduring human questions about origin, purpose, and existence. You sense that resonance now. It is quiet but strong. A curious detail emerges when you consider how stories evolve over time. Each generation revisits them, reshaping them slightly, adding new layers, new interpretations, while still preserving something of the original. The Anunnaki, once part of a specific cultural context, now exist in many forms. Ancient deities, symbols of cosmic order, figures in speculative theories, characters in modern storytelling. You feel how easily the story adapts, how it continues to live not in one place but across many. The air carries a faint warmth, like the memory of sunlight on stone, grounding you in a sense of continuity. It reminds you that stories like people change over time, yet remain connected to their origins. Scholars continue to explore why certain myths endure while others fade. Some researchers from Yale University suggest that stories which address fundamental human concerns are more likely to persist. Others, including perspectives from Stanford University, argue that the adaptability of a narrative plays a key role in its longevity. You feel that adaptability here, the way the story of the Anunnaki has shifted, expanded, and reformed across centuries, yet still carries the same underlying questions. One scandalous aside appears when you consider how modern fascination with these stories sometimes blurs the line between entertainment and belief. What begins as curiosity can for some become conviction, even when evidence remains uncertain. You let that thought rest lightly, because the appeal of the story is not only in what it claims, but in what it invites you to imagine. No agreement has been reached on why certain ancient narratives continue to capture attention so strongly in the modern world. Some scholars from Princeton University suggest that these stories tap into deep psychological patterns, offering a sense of connection to something greater. Others believe that the mystery itself, the lack of definitive answers, keeps them alive. You allow that mystery to remain because it feels appropriate. The space around you becomes softer now, less defined, as though the boundaries between places, times and ideas are gently dissolving. The ruins, the temples, the skies, the fields, all seem to exist together in a quiet harmony. You are no longer moving through them. You are resting within them. The story no longer unfolds in a straight line. It settles. You begin to sense how everything you have experienced connects. The early myths of creation, the rise of cities and kings, the careful recording of stories in clay, the rediscovery and reinterpretation of those stories, the questioning, the analysis, the exploration of possibility, all of it forms a single continuous thread. And at the center of that thread is a simple, enduring question. Where did we come from? You feel a quiet acceptance of that question, not as something that must be answered, but as something that gives shape to the journey itself. The presence of the Anunnaki in all its forms becomes part of that journey, not a final answer, but a reflection, a way of exploring the unknown. The warmth in the air deepens slightly, like the gentle embrace of evening settling in. It carries a sense of completion, not as an ending, but as a pause. Your thoughts slow further, the details soften, the need to analyze fades, only the feeling remains, the sense of having traveled through something vast, something layered, something deeply human. And as you rest in that quiet understanding, you begin to sense that the final moment is approaching, a return to stillness, a simple reflection beneath the same sky where the story began. The mystery remains, the story endures, and you drift gently toward its final breath. The warmth settles softly around you, like the final glow of a day that has gently reached its end. The long journey through stories, cities, symbols, and questions begins to quiet, not fading away, but becoming still. You find yourself beneath the sky once more. It feels familiar now, not distant or overwhelming, but calm and steady, as though it has been waiting for you to return. The stars stretch above in quiet patterns unchanged by time, yet somehow richer with meaning after everything you have experienced. The air is cool, carrying only the faintest trace of night. No scent distracts you now. No sound pulls your attention away. It is a moment of stillness. For a moment it feels as though everything has come full circle. You lie there, or perhaps simply rest in place, aware of the ground beneath you and the vastness above. The story of the Anunnaki no longer feels like something separate from you. It feels like part of a larger reflection. Records confirm, based on research from institutions such as Harvard University and the University of Oxford, that humanity has always looked to the sky when asking questions about origin and meaning. From ancient Mesopotamia to modern astronomy, the act of looking upward remains a constant thread in human experience. You feel that thread now. It connects the earlier storytellers to you. A curious detail emerges when you consider how little the sky itself has changed. The same stars that guided ancient myths still shine today, offering the same quiet invitation to wonder. You watch them without urgency. There is no need to interpret, no need to decide. Scholars continue to reflect on the enduring human desire to understand existence. Some researchers from Yale University suggest that this search is not only about finding answers, but about creating meaning. Others, including perspectives from Stanford University, believe that the process of questioning itself is what shapes human identity. You let that idea settle gently, because it feels complete. One scandalous aside appears when you consider how even in modern times with advanced science and technology, the deepest questions remain open. Despite everything that has been discovered, the origins of life, consciousness, and purpose still invite exploration. You allow that mystery to remain, not as something unresolved, but as something alive. No agreement has been reached on whether humanity will ever fully understand its origins. Some scholars from Princeton University suggest that each generation will move closer to clarity. Others believe that certain questions may always remain beyond complete explanation. You accept that possibility because here in this quiet moment it does not feel limiting. It feels peaceful. The story of the Anunnaki, with all its layers, no longer asks you to believe or to reject. It simply exists as part of a long human tradition of storytelling, questioning and seeking. You feel a gentle sense of completion, not because every question has been answered, but because the journey itself has been experienced. The sky above remains steady. The earth beneath you feels calm, and between them you rest. Your thoughts slow even further now, like a river easing into still water. The details of the story soften, blending into a single quiet understanding that humanity has always searched, always wondered, always told stories to make sense of the unknown. The Anunnaki are part of that story, a reflection of ancient minds reaching upward, a reminder that curiosity is as old as civilization itself. The night deepens slightly, though it does not feel darker. It feels quieter, more settled, as though the world itself is resting. You breathe slowly, the air moves gently, nothing demands your attention, and in that stillness you find a kind of peace. The journey has not ended, it has simply come to rest. You remain here beneath the endless sky, aware of the connection that stretches across time, linking past and present in a quiet, continuous thread. And as you drift deeper into that calm, the story releases you gently, allowing you to rest within the quiet space it has created. Before you drift fully into rest, there is one more gentle thought to carry with you. If this journey, through ancient skies and quiet questions, stayed with you in some small way, you might consider sharing what part you found most meaningful. Was it the first whisper of the stars, the shaping of clay into life, or the quiet mystery that still lingers at the edge of understanding? Let your thoughts settle, then leave a comment when you feel ready. Your reflections become part of a shared space where others like you pause and wonder. And if you wish to continue this calm exploration, there are more stories waiting just beyond this one. Other civilizations, other mysteries, each carrying their own quiet rhythm. For now, rest. Let the story fade gently into the background, like distant stars at dawn. And know that wherever you are, in whatever quiet moment you find yourself, this same sky stretches above you, steady and unbroken. Blessings to you and your family.